When I walk down the streets of Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh, my mind is absolutely buzzing. Things are screaming at me, but it's at things that possibly most of the people around me aren't realizing that's in plain sight. Because as you see all of this Vietnamese written around you in Quoc Ngo, or the romanized Vietnamese script that was brought in by Westerners in more recent years, it's almost like chopping off these historical roots to so much of the language. When I first started learning Vietnamese as a Chinese speaker, I found it much easier to learn Vietnamese directly through Chinese characters. And so what I'm going to do today is take you on a journey through the magic of Chữ Nôm. This is the Vietnamese Chinese characters. If you are a Chinese speaker, Japanese speaker, Korean speaker, or anybody who has a grounding in Chinese characters, you're going to love what Vietnamese has to offer as far as Chữ Nôm. And if you did want to learn Vietnamese, I highly recommend, if you do have a grounding in kanji or hanzi, that you learn a good proportion of your vocabulary through the characters. Don't just learn them through the romanized script. Now, there might be some Vietnamese people there who are upset with me saying that, but honestly, once you actually crack the code in how to turn your Chinese or Japanese or Korean Hanja characters into these Chữ Nôm and back the other way, you're going to appreciate a real new depth to the language. And best of all, you're going to be able to build up vocabulary in Vietnamese very fast. Now, I know if you are a Chinese speaker and you're listening to Vietnamese, now when I say Chinese, say you're a Mandarin speaker, you're going to think, wow, this just doesn't sound the same. The sounds are completely different. If you speak Cantonese or more southern languages, dialects, now that's another thing that I need to get into in another clip. Is Cantonese a language or a dialect? Let's see. But anyway, if you do speak Mandarin and you're listening to Vietnamese, the sounds are very different. That's because the sounds of Vietnamese, and especially the Sino-Viet words that have been introduced into normal Vietnamese lexicon, well, officially recognized as Chinese loanwords into Vietnamese, have come through many periods of time, going back thousands of years, starting with Middle Chinese. So a lot of these pronunciations that you're getting, the Vietnamese words that are said to be Sino-Vietnamese or Chinese Vietnamese words, are actually coming from these old pronunciations. So in order to do that, it's really handy to know how to switch your modern Mandarin into almost pseudo Middle Chinese at least, so you can do some sound conversions, and then the conversions back into Vietnamese or back and forth are going to make a lot more sense. But before we do any of that, let's just do a really quick recap of what Chinese characters are and how they work, because you need to kind of understand this to be able to understand and really appreciate how Vietnamese Chữ Nôm characters work. Any native Chinese speaker, when you learn Chinese, you've probably learned liu shu. Liu shu means the 6 forms or the 6 ways that Chinese characters are put together. Many Westerners who go in to learn Chinese, and if they've just got a very surface level of Chinese characters, maybe you've learned that there are many Chinese characters that actually look like what they mean. Actually, the creator of the very popular Chinesey Learn Chinese Character series, Xue Xiaolan, designed these amazing graphics that let you kind of tie these original meanings into the shapes of the characters, which is kind of what they were, so you get a really solid base. I've heard a lot of Westerners talk about Chinese characters, and they speak as though most Chinese characters are designed this way, and the fact is that they're not. Out of like tens of thousands of characters, only around 600 or so characters are actually these pictographic forms. And so this is the first form of character we learn. This is the 象形数. So these are ones that look like what they are. And so, for example, you had the sun like this, and so that became that, and that became sun. Or you've got this, it looks like a tree. Okay, so you can imagine the tree around there. Or the moon going around like that, which became that, and then this becomes moon. Now, one note, later on when you see this, it doesn't always mean moon. This could, in many characters, actually mean flesh. So even though that's yue in modern Chinese, this component will often be used to mean flesh in characters, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So there are many of these characters that look like what they are. Mountain, you can see the mountain range there. Okay, so this is the first form, but it's only a very small portion. And then you get the second form of characters. And so that's the 只是. 只是 means that they're actually like ideograms. So they don't necessarily look like the physical form, but for example, this is above while this is below. Makes sense, right? So this is the second form of Chinese characters that native Chinese speakers will learn at school. Now, the next one are compounds of those. So for example, we had the sun, so that's this character here, and then we had the moon, which was this, and so when you link these together, you might get a compound meaning. So they're both bright, so this is, and so this is Ming. Now, you've got to understand that the language, the spoken language, always precedes the written. And so native speakers will know the word Ming. And so they'll put this together and they'll know this word, but they'll just say, okay, this character, they're both bright. You've got the sun and the moon, so that means bright. And you can almost see the light coming off of it. And so these are our compound characters. So these compound characters are called 会意. So they might be mixing these pictograms or ideograms together to extend the meanings. But these are still in the minority. The next category is the category that most Chinese characters, up to 90%, fall into. And this is the system that most Vietnamese characters used when they were creating characters for words that weren't in the Chinese lexicon as well. And so this category is called the 形声. 形 means the form or the type of something, 声, and then the sound. And so what you will have is a meaning component and a sound component to the character. So for example, we have this character here that meant tree. And so that is mu. So we have this word, mu, which takes the sound component of this, but adds water to us. Now, this is an interesting one because originally we had water flowing like this. And so the modern character for water is that, but then, which in fast writing would probably be like that, which looks very similar to that. But then you can also get these three dots. We call them 三点水. So this is a water component that's added to a lot of stuff. So water added to the sound mu, which is mu, which means to wash. Now there's another one. Now we had one tree, so two trees, lin, means a forest. But then if you add water to that, we're just going to now use the sound component, lin, which by the way, in Old Chinese or Middle Chinese was more the sound of lam, which you'll need to know later on as you're converting these sounds back. But this word, lin, then means to pour. So the thing that has to do with water or liquid that sounds like lin, which means to pour. And so this in turn means pour. And this is what most Chinese characters fall into. This category is where you have a meaning component and then you have a sound component put together. And the problem with modern Chinese is that the sounds have shifted so much from Middle Chinese, Old Chinese, through geography and through time, that very often the actual sound of the sound component character doesn't really seem apparent because it's shifted. So for example, this character here, in modern Chinese, we call this gong, meaning to work, and that's in the Chinesey series as well. However, we would have learned, and if you take Minecraft, you would know this, that gong, that could be kong or kang, and then what happens, we have palatization. So what happens is, this is the indic compass of the mouth, but this actually shows how sounds shift. So this is g, this is j. And so what happens, say we have the word kirk, church, this even happens across European languages and it happens in Chinese languages too. So for example, the word for chicken, ji, is gai in older Chinese, or gai, goi, any of these could be there, and the vowels will shift according to where that comes from. And so if we look at older words like gong, gang, they get palatized. Kiang, kiang, jiang, jiang, they move to there. So what we need to know then, so this originally, gong, when we look in Mandarin, this is jiang, meaning river. So water that sounds like gong. You think, well, wait a minute, gong is not jiang, that's not the same word. Well, actually, the way sounds shift, even though in modern Chinese, the word is jiang, meaning river, I will be thinking, well, jiang, as soon as I see this palatization in modern Mandarin, jiang, I'm thinking, that probably could be a ke. So jiang, kiang, and get rid of this palatization, gang. So it could be gang, gong. And this is the fuzzy kind of logic that we need to use when we're looking at not only Vietnamese characters, but even Japanese, Korean, because they'll have these same sounds of shifts because Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, they took the Chinese pronunciations of much older Chinese, whether it's from Middle Chinese or even other dialects that are in the South, which have pronunciations closer to the old pronunciations. Mandarin, think of it as, I guess, like a really modern, or at least a more modern version of Chinese compared to these older languages. So now let's get into then the Vietnamese characters, the Chữ Nôm. So if you go to this website here, chunom.org, that's CHUNOM. Now you don't put the diacritics in the URL. This is actually written Chữ Nôm. You will see all of these Chinese Vietnamese characters, and you can actually download the list, which is exactly what I've done here. And so what I've done, I've downloaded this, but I've also added some columns. Now, it's really interesting because if you're a Chinese speaker, you're going to be going down many of these characters and thinking, well, I know that, but that one looks really weird. And so you will see that in these Vietnamese Chữ Nôm characters, there are a whole bunch of them that are the normal Chinese characters. Most of them will use the original meaning, but some will just borrow the character for the sound. But then there are other characters that are just totally unique to Vietnamese that they've actually put together, but they've put them together using this sound versus the semantic components to make their own characters. Now, I've done something a little tricky here. You can see in the far column, I've got a column there, Viet only. So the way that I actually did this was I got this list. Now I'm using Visidata here to open my TSV file. And what I did, if I say GS, it selects everything, and I can go to this, and I selected the whole column here, and I pasted it into Google Sheets. And then what I did was just do a translation from Chinese to English. And I found that any word that there wasn't a Chinese translation for, well, it must be Vietnamese. Well, that was my logic, and it worked pretty well. Now, the funny thing about Google Translate, for some reason, all of the ones that were the Vietnamese Chữ Nôm characters, it translated as bamboo, the actual English word bamboo, which is cool. So then what I did was anything that was bamboo, let me just deselect those for a minute, go deselect. I said to write true, that this is a Viet only, and false. So if I look at all the false ones, they should be only Chinese characters. And so let's have a look at a subset of those. And so if you're a Chinese speaker, you will probably recognize many of these characters. Let me just blow it up a little for you. So as a Chinese speaker, you'll probably know all of these because they are common characters. Now, the pronunciations might look a little weird for you, but if I come back and I select only the true ones, these are going to, for the most part, look very weird to you. Now, these characters are characters that have been designed especially for Vietnamese. And so I'm going to go through a few of these ones to show you how they work. But before I do, let me just show you some of the sound shifts that you're going to have to look out for. So I'm going to deselect those. So here's the first one. Let's have a look. The word ba. Now, if you're a Chinese speaker, you would know that this character here is ba. And they have a mouth component. But what happens now, we have the same shift in Romance languages, in European languages. So if I say the word to kiss in Spanish, beso, even though it's spelt with a B, the B in Spanish is this cross between a B and a B. Beso, beso. Same happens in Indic languages. And so you might get a v, b, w. All of these sounds interacting and changing into each other depending what dialect of any language you're looking at, and Vietnamese is no exception. And so instead of ba, va, that's a very common shift we get. And so anytime you get a B in, say, normal Mandarin, which is actually an aspirated P, that could well turn to a V in Vietnamese. And so va, va. Now that meaning though means and in Vietnamese. So they've borrowed the character from Chinese for the actual sounds, but then they're saying, but we're going to use it for this word in Vietnamese, which isn't unlike even what we see happening in Cantonese. Yeah, there are some characters in Hong Kong and in Cantonese that you will see used specifically for Cantonese, but other Cantonese characters, they'll be borrowing just normal characters, but changing the meaning for the actual Cantonese word. Now, here's another one. Now, check this one out. I'm going to take you through a journey on this. Most Chinese speakers would know this character, wen, in modern Chinese, wen, meaning culture or written text, something like that, the written language. Now, we know from many other dialects, like in Cantonese, man, this were actually bun, bun, bun. The throat closes on it, and that becomes something more like mun or mun. So this is a common shift again, because they're all coming from the lips. If we come back and look at this Indic map of the mouth, which is what actually you can see here, these are the Sanskrit letters, and Thai is based on the same thing. I'll just turn those back off. These are all from what we call the labial varga, the labial portion. This is why we have per, mer, fr, de, ter, ne, they actually follow this same pattern, just in reverse. So we get w turning into m, man, and then what happens in Vietnamese, we get the throat closing not only at the beginning, but the throat often closes at the end. And so man, 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 this will often turn into a T as well, especially if you have this tone marker down here, which basically cuts off the throat. So wen turns into mun, turns into mot, mot, which is this character here then equals the number 1, which is pronounced mot, with this low tone here. So this character that looks like wen gets an added dot to the top of it, and they're saying we're going to use the sound from wen as wen, mot, 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 and use that for our number 1. And that's very similar to the way many, many characters in Vietnamese are put together. This one is the same. People who speak Chinese will say, well, it kind of looks similar, but it looks really weird. Let me take you on a journey of this character here, người, meaning people or person. So in Vietnamese, this is the character for person. Now, if you speak Chinese, you would recognize this is zhen, and it's a component, but you're thinking, well, wait a minute, what's that component? This is what I mean by Vietnamese taking old forms. Now, this looks very familiar, like say we have in words like this, de, in modern Chinese. However, this wasn't always just de. So let me just show you this character here, which may look a little more familiar to you. This was the original meaning of that character. So we got that going down. Now, this is the word ai, meaning an obstacle or a hindrance, something that's in the way. And this was actually originally also written as this. And you will see this also in some Japanese words. I think in Japanese, maybe they've even got it written like this. And so this I in Mandarin was originally ngai and ngoi, something like that in Middle Chinese or Old Chinese. And so you had this nasalization at the beginning, ng, 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 which is very hard for English speakers to say, ngoi, ngoi, ngo, ngo, ngo. So they're taking the original sound, I, even though it's I, from modern Chinese, it was ngoi, ngoi, which we also get even in Cantonese. The word, how do you say love? I in Cantonese, ngoi, oi, oi, ngoi. So this is a common thing. If you speak Cantonese, learning Vietnamese is really easy. So this word ngai, if they're saying I'm going to use the sound from this component, ngoi, and the meaning of person, người, người, to mean person. And so this is how this character came to mean person and represent the sound người in Vietnamese. There are just so many of these. Here's another example of a character in Vietnamese that you would know this as a normal Chinese character. Let me show you how it works. So in normal Chinese, if you look at this character here, now remember I just mentioned a minute ago, jiang meaning river. We had this character, so this was river in modern Chinese, but it had this component which was gang gong meaning work in modern Mandarin. This is in here. So this is the kong sound, and this is the meaning component in modern Chinese. This is 学 or meaning a hole or some kind of empty space. And so the empty space that sounds like gong gang is kong in Mandarin, which means empty, open. But what it is extended to mean in Vietnamese is hong, which means not. And basically, in Vietnamese, if you're wanting to have a yes-no sentence, so for example, health. Healthy is khỏe, có khỏe không, không. This word không, now notice it's getting in the throat, but it's still this không. Hong is basically saying 日不老 in Thai or 是不是, is it or is it not? But literally it's saying or not. This hong character literally means the absence of anything, which is in turn meaning not. So if I'm saying in Vietnamese, em có khỏe không? Em có khỏe literally means younger sister. So it's what I would use if I was speaking to some female who was younger than me. Are you well? Or in Thai, sabai di du plau. This is like almost the word in Thai that we have, plau, meaning not, the absence of anything. And it's used in Vietnamese as a tag to turn something into a yes-no question. So it's kind of the same meaning as what we have in modern Chinese, as in an absence of something, empty space, but this absence has been extended to mean not in Vietnamese. And so this is what I mean. As I look at Vietnamese, it's just my mind is on fire. Now, to give you an example of these characters in Vietnamese, let me just come through here. I will go on these true and show you just how many of them are there. Let me just scroll through them. You're getting so many of these different characters that are so creative. And if you know the base character, so if as you're looking these and you know, say, the top portion or the right portion, the left portion of it, well, then all you need to do then is learn the base sound. So you just learn a few sound shift tricks and you've got instant vocabulary in Vietnamese. The thing that I love about Mike Campbell's Glossica, this is the old version of it. I have the PDF file here, but you can see here, he's actually used the Chữ Nôm characters for each Vietnamese word. And for me, just learning Vietnamese like this was so much easier because let's just have a look at this word here. So we know this is hien, hom. If you speak Korean, this is something like hom as well. So you know this base character, but to do with the sun or a day, meaning day, which means day. So hom nay. Again, we have this ni here for the sound, and this kyo in Japanese, or jin meaning today, now. So this means today, hom nay, today. It's this day. It makes total sense. The word trời. Now, this top character means tian, heavens, the sky, but it also means weather. Tianqi, we would know in modern Mandarin. And so trời, the weather up top, and that means trời, weather. Trời có. So here we have the right component, yo, meaning to have, but then we have the sound component, gu, which is back in Middle Chinese, ga. So ga, the thing that means to have that sounds like ga, which is ga. So hôm nay chơi ga. This is how we create meanings. Instead of we say something yo, we put it the other way around in Vietnamese. So this is a possessive particle. And then we have, okay, this is the Chinese meaning of the word lạnh, lạnh, meaning cold, hong, and we just learned about hong just now. So here it's saying today weather has coldness. So is the weather cold, hong or not? 热不热，是不是? And then the answer of that is hong lạnh. Now notice how this dot under is this tone. It literally means stop it in the throat and kill the throat off. So hong lạnh, hong lạnh. So it literally stops off the throat. Now Mike has amazing IPA here as well. So it literally means, is the weather cold today? It's not cold, but we can see now through the Chinese characters the deep meaning. It's just amazing. And so this is why I said at the beginning, when I walk down the streets of Hanoi, of Ho Chi Minh, and I see these signs, because I kind of understand the sound shifts coming from Middle Chinese, and I know my vocab from Chinese, Cantonese, and other Chinese dialects, as well as being able to speak Thai. So anything that's basically not with this Sinitic root, you can very often find the same kind of meaning in Thai. So for example, the word new. Now, most Chinese speakers would know this meaning 买, To buy and to sell is actually this. Now, this gets into where tones came from, because we had things going in, things going out. Things going in, mai, we're buying. Things going out, mai, we're selling. So what they've done is taken this, added water to it, but this means sort of freshness. So this is the word mới, meaning new. Now, you would know in Thai, the word for new is mai. Now, we also know in Thai that this, I used to sound like so in Thai, originally the word for new was mơ. In Vietnamese is mới, it's just the reverse of that. And so again, this is why my mind is just buzzing. Speaking Thai, speaking Chinese, speaking Cantonese, and knowing these older dialects, older languages in Chinese, as you're walking down the streets, you just see the links there. And so I would say anybody who speaks Chinese or speaks a language that uses Chinese characters, learning Vietnamese, you're going to be doing yourself a favor learning it through the characters as well. Now, you're not going to get many texts in that, but as you're building up vocab, and also through Glossica, I think Mike probably still uses the Chinese characters because I know Mike loves them. You're going to get so much more depth to understanding the deeper meanings even of the modern Vietnamese words, which if you learnt them just through the Romanized script, you're going to miss it. So that was a very fast tour of Chinese characters, Vietnamese Chữ Nôm characters. I highly recommend that you get into them. And who knows, you may have never thought of learning Vietnamese before, but now you've got a new language that you see a whole new potential in learning in a relatively fast time. Don't forget to scan the QR code up top and join our Discord server and join in with this amazing learning community. I'm Stuart J. Raj. I'll see you on the other side.